Good morning. Winterview, back again with another brief dialogue for my dear friend Annastacey. This morning's dialogue, following on from my previous dialogue, is on the nature of the quest. In this brief dialogue, I 100% guarantee that you'll be enlightened by the end. I'm just kidding. So, there's a book that I read many years ago called I Am That by Nisargadatta Maharaj. This is a very famous book within the realm of Enlightenment / Non-duality, etc. And the book is, in essence, a transcription of talks that were given by Nisargadatta Maharaj in his apartment where he lived in Bombay, in India. And seekers would come from around the world and sit in the apartment and listen to this diminutive Indian man give very lively discussions or dialogues about the natural state, I think he called it. And one of the repeated urgings by Nisargadatta in these dialogues, at least if we're to believe the translators, was to somehow focus on the sense of I am. Another famous Indian sage, Ramana Maharshi. Some of you listening might have heard of Ramana. Also, in some ways, made or seemed to urge the seeker or the listener to inquire as to who they really are, or who am I, as was popularized. The seeker in both contexts, Nisargadatta or Ramana, often felt in some ways or at least in the mind, a relief that there was something that they could do. They had to, broadly speaking, figure out this I am principle even, or look into this I am. And off they would go, and often for many years, somehow trying to look for this sense of I am, or this state of I am, or something to do with me or I, etc. And to their frequent dismay, it was a very confusing pointer. What is this I am? How do I actually turn my attention to this I am thing, I amness, and focus on it? How do I look into my true nature? What do I actually do? And this would often, at least speaking broadly, would lead to sort of a vague meditative sort of state where you somehow felt you had to sit quietly or take yourself out of the busyness of life and spend some time and really zoom in on this. And erroneously, at least from the accounts that I've read or I'm familiar with, it would help if you were quiet. This would often lead to just taking some time out of the day to find some solitude, and really nail this, really focus down on this thing that was being called the I am, or the I am principle, or looking into the I am somehow. But at the end of the day, that's a pointer to the mind to do something. And the mind, as we know, operates in movement, in time and space. So it inevitably feels like it's looking for a thing that can be found in time space. And because it's the mind at the end of the day, it inevitably tries to look for what it thinks, what it conceptualizes as the I am. And as we know in spirituality in general, things like states of peace, states of bliss, quietness, solitude, quietude, all those types of things feature prominently in the mind as targets. I got to hit this sort of spaceless, quiet target to somehow be closer to this sense of I am. Or it leads to a sort of funny looping phenomenon in the mind where it sort of might keep even repeating the words I am, endlessly, as if that would somehow, as if it's somehow it. This I am, or that I am, it cannot be described. It has no objective qualities that can be pointed to and said that that's what it is. And that's why when words like consciousness, awareness, presence, etc. somehow describe it, seemingly, they at the same time veil it, because those words suggest objective qualities. The word presence, for example, somehow conjures up something, thing, in quotes, that is present, which the mind feels like it can understand in some ways, because it can be labelled. And even the word pointer, or the expression to point, these are pointers, that can be confusing too. It can sort of conjure up the image of the finger pointing to the horizon, and you have to look over there. It's over there. So that sets up in the mind that even a sophisticated mind, okay, it's not this, I've got to look somewhere over there. So it's extremely confounding, extremely frustrating to the mind. So spirituality in this way can be an extremely confusing endeavor. We're certain that these sages are talking about something real. We're just certain of that, because thousands of people will go and sit with them, or have sat with them and have read their books and have had perhaps similar personal experiences, and then have written their own books and given talks. And so there's a very rich cultural infrastructure, heritage, tradition around it, such that the mind is convinced there's something there, and all it has to do is figure it out somehow. But this that I am cannot ever be looked at in any way. It cannot be thought about even. One cannot be directed in such a way that they can suddenly say, oh, there it is. Because it's just because the nature of that which is non-local, non-spatial, it's not anything, yet it is everything as well at the same time. So it's very confusing and paradoxical even to hear that, and even as I say it, I understand how that will be heard. So we have pointers that in their best intention try to give a flavour of that frustration and futility as well. The fact that everything apparently changes except existence itself, to my way of thinking, is the clue. And even as I say that, I'm aware, oh god, that's going to be taken poorly or taken by a mind, and it'll be run with in some way. So I get stuck too on these descriptions, and when I hear these assertions to look at the I am and to explore who you are, etc., I understand where that is coming from, in a sense. But it's, at the end of the day, it's a directive which can only be heard intellectually, can only be heard in conceptually / intellectually. Sometimes it's said by speakers that it'll be heard by your true essence, or that which you really are, which I think is misleading. I think it's a bit of a nonsense. It again, because it implies there is secretly something behind the scenes, this sort of magical, mystical, godly essence that is behind the scenes listening to this. It puts in an extra step into it. The immediacy of this cannot be understated. The ever-presentness that is not hidden cannot be understated, which it makes it so stunningly obvious that it can become a joke when it's realized. It's like, oh, it's this, not something else that was a bit veiled and then was revealed. It really is this. But confusingly, what this is not what the mind imagined. So, this existence, if I call it a sense of existence, one might imagine that that existence is perceived, and try and loop on that. How do I perceive existence? Existence has you could say, a quality of isness. So rather than I exist or there is existence, just existence. The sort of fundamental fact that something is statically, you could say, there. That ever-presentness. Ever-presentness. Which is which is awake. Which is awake. Is it? The appearance, the comings and goings, the manifestation in general, it drifts in and out. It pops in and out, I could say. It's ever changing. And so to focus on the ever changing and then to reify or solidify that is where the core confusion arises. For example, a very simple example. On the horizon, I see a mountain. And the mind immediately, you could say, takes the mountain and says there is a mountain, gives it existence, gives it permanence. It's there for all time. That mountain is there when I look away. And it imagines that mountain has another side to it. There's the side that I can't see, must exist. So the mind creates the sense that you're living in this solid, static world. That's what I mean by reifies. It takes the experience, you could say, as it's appearing. This is a bit of a clunky explanation. Takes the experience as it's appearing, and when focus, you could say, that's the attentional mechanism of mind, locks on to some part of the experience that's ever changing, imagines its solidity, permanence, stability, etc. But this is where it's funny, there has never been an experience of permanence. There's been, you could say there's been extrapolations of permanence, where, for example, that mountain that I was referring to earlier, when I'm driving home, I'll see it again. And the mind will go, well, there it is, of course, because it's a mountain, it's not going to go anywhere. Therefore, it's solid, therefore it exists. Therefore, I'm over here, it's over there, and so on and so forth. It does it so beautifully, so effortlessly, that you wouldn't even doubt it. Why doubt it? So giving that tendency towards solidity, stability, existence, etc. In the geographic, natural realm, that's not necessarily a problem. It's perfectly fine. But when we do the same thing, when the mind does the same thing, same behavior, you could say, on the person, then it all gets very weird very quickly. This person, this me, has existence, it's there, it has substance, it has permanence in some ways, even though the mind imagines it will die, the person will die one day. For the time being, it has some permanence. The same behaviors that it applied to the mountain, it applies to the person. But the worst thing, I think, in many ways, is the evidence for the person is a lot flimsier than the evidence for the mountain. At least you can see the mountain. The person is way more suspect in that sense. But undeterred, the mind locks in this person, reifies it, gives it existence, naturally gives it existence, then moves forward in the story of the world as if the person has real, separate, independent existence. And now that becomes a problem for the mind. The reason it's a problem is because there is no person. So the mind has to do incredible flip-flops, gymnastics, to create a narrative in which this person exists and have it make sense. Have it make sense. So this leads in, you could say, in the mental realm at least, to a whole host of mental problems. If, for example, I lose my car keys, when I park I lose my car keys, it's that I lost my car keys. The mind, which remember is holding this idea of person as real, ascribes that to the person. The person lost its car keys. And not being content with that, it now has to give a rationalization to make the narrative, to make the story make sense. The person lost the car keys because the person is an idiot. Is a usual, some judgment on the person. What sort of person would lose their car keys? An idiotic person. Now, let's compound that by many, many negative events over the course of a life, and suddenly the idea of the person being an idiot locks in. This is a solid, real thing. This person, who I've already locked in as real, now has a quality of being an idiot, a moron. A very negative, harsh self-judgment. And that's now real. So now I have to incorporate the two concepts, the idiot and the person, together at all times. And then I have to make that narrative make sense. So events have to be spun around that structure now. And suddenly we have a person with psychological problems, or at least a mind that is creating psychological problems. So we can come back. What we can do now is, as was suggested by Nisargadatta and Ramana, as was suggested, rather than looking for this magical, mystical I am, it can be seen in some ways very clearly that if we remove, for example, the belief of permanence and see the world as, or see the appearance of the world as ever changing, yet I never change. I exist seamlessly and ever presently. The mind is forced into a kind of a dilemma. It's like it's in movies where you see two characters wrestling over a gun or a knife until the stronger of the two forces the grip, the hand, to release the knife. It has to drop the knife or the gun. The mind is forced in the recognition of its own beliefs to drop the concepts. And what the recognition implies is that the story, the sense of permanence, is a narrative, is an idea, is a belief. When the mind is faced with that, it cannot hold the knife anymore. It has to drop the knife. It has to drop the concepts. Of course, the world is ever changing. Of course it is. It changes from instant to instant, the appearance of the world. Yet my existence itself, the core, you could say, of I, has never come or gone anywhere. And I don't know anything about that. There's nothing I can say about it. I even recognize that the words presence or awareness, etc., are woefully inadequate. So I recognize the permanence, yet I recognize that I can't say anything about it. I recognize that I cannot say anything about that sense of I. And in that instant, you could say, the mind is forced to drop the concept. So that is the recognition of the, we'll call it the I am, why not? In that recognition of the I am, ideas about self, about me, about the world, about life, about everything tend to fall away when it's seen clearly that I'm not the ideas, the concepts, the ever-moving, shifting appearance of life, when it's seen that that's all reified narrative nonsense. Those concepts are dropped. The mind cannot sustain that story when that is seen. So when it said, when that is seen, that's a mystery. I actually can't explain that bit. Anywho, once again, this was just a brief taster, little dialogue, pondering the words of the great sages, trying to give a little modernized spin or update on them. Once again, thank you for listening, and as usual, your comments are welcome.